So I wanted to talk, before we talk specifically about the works we've seen tonight, just a little bit about the commissioning process. And if you could just talk a little bit about, what does a residency look like? So you've got a choreographer coming to Aspen, and what happens?
Typically, we like to give the choreographer free rein they just take over the company. Many times in a bigger company, the choreographer might come in, they might have 2 hours a day. They won't have the full cast because so-and-so has to do Swan Lake in the other studio. But we give them the full day, all the dancers. We give them typically maybe at least 5 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks to build a ballet like these big ballets that you see.
So when you say you give them free range, you don't know what they're thinking about making?
Typically we don't, and we don't impose any of our ideas onto them because neither one of us choreograph, and that's why we hired them. And so we like to let them do what they do. We don't stipulate the music, the lights, the costumes, the casting, anything like that.
So I won't ask you to say who, because certainly nobody on this program, but did you ever go into the studio, maybe you take a break from your day and you go in and see what's happening and you think, uh-oh, what's going to happen here?
We do at times, but if somebody had walked into the office 20 years ago, they would have said, oh. So it's really part of our culture of risk-taking and experiment. Tom mentioned giving the choreographers carte blanche. That's exactly what our founder, Bibi Shwepe, did with us. She gave us a blank slate to start a new dance company and a new business model. And so we're trying to really, that's our legacy, and we're trying to pass that on to the choreographers. And so risk-taking is not that foreign, to us. We do it very often.
Could you talk a little bit as rehearsal director about what it's, as one of your other hats you're wearing, what it's like to try to coach that into a very different thing in the next piece and how you keep the worlds different from each other?
I think the 3 pieces on tonight's program really demonstrate the versatility of the dancers and how they interpret one choreographer from the other. Obviously, Fernando's piece is completely different, but when you look at the first piece and the last piece on the program, the first piece is without any affectation whatsoever. It's just completely, I don't want to say pedestrian, but it's very, there's absolutely no affectation. If a dancer dares look to the audience or give a little extra shoulder, he will just stop the whole rehearsal. And on the other hand, Cayetano's, it's all about the body, the angle, the épaulement, and the hands, the way they flare their fingers, and it's much, much, much more stylized than when you look at Alejandro's works.
In maintaining those qualitative differences, what's the conversation like with the dancers who are in the room and with you?
We work very, in Alejandro's work, we tend to work very linear, horizontal lines, wide stances, wide movements, from typically a lot of his movement goes directly side to side. There's not a lot of diagonals. And so that's, once you sort of key into that concept, that combined with the weight drop.
We'll start with the most mysterious, and I'm imagining we all know by most mysterious that I'm talking about the middle piece by Fernando Melo. Could you talk a little bit about stepping into the rehearsal and watching him make the work?
Yeah, a lot of people are taken aback by it, and they get very offended by it because it's something very different and they can't figure it out and they don't know what it's about. It's really not really about anything, and these are abstract ballets that we do, and that ballet is really, to me, it's fragments of memory, a series of fragments. You don't necessarily know what they are until they start to connect with each other, and it's like this giant puzzle that finally connects to something, and then it just sort of deconstructs the same way that it constructed. But it's very mathematical, and he had like giant post-it notes on the wall with these mathematical, it was like an algebra class in there. People had little notes of paper that they did the whole 4 weeks of rehearsal with their pads, doing it with their notes, trying to remember what came next. And that was before we even got the lighting involved.
Could you see that something sort of mysterious was happening when you were stepping in and looking at what was going on?
It was very difficult to see that in the studio, and even now when we rehearse it, it's almost impossible to rehearse in the studio. We have to rehearse it with the video, and so someone has to say on, off, meaning the light's on. Because they have to be in the exact spot in the dark when that light comes on for those little montage, those little images. And I'm so happy that you refer to it as mysterious, because we've been really working on that quality, that there's something mysterious about it, something reminiscent, a memory, what is it? What are those little vignettes? What do they mean?
So now let's go to what I would have to say the most fun piece on the program. So you got your upbeat celebration, a piece with, you got red, you've got those fantastic lights, you've got that music. Could you talk a little bit about what they were discovering in that and what he was bringing out? And this is the third piece he's made for you.
Cayetano, it's an incredible process. He works so collaboratively with the dancers, it's really great for them. He brought in, this time he brought in text. A bunch of text from different comedians. One of them was Joan Rivers. And he gave them the text and they all, he gave them each a little different snippets of it. And he said, now create some movement to interpret that text. And then, so they went off in the corner all and did that. And then he incorporated those into the ballet.
Could you talk a little bit about where the music is coming in? And so each of these choreographers, I think, is working in a very sort of current way of how they're scoring these dances, rather than the sort of Stravinsky-Balanchine relationship, a very different kind of thing. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we get that question a lot, and it just varies by choreographer. For instance, Alejandro really created the dance to those particular songs. Cayetano did pretty much that as well. But for the second piece, the music had to be put on sort of after, it had to be fit in. A lot of those tracks don't play in their entirety, or they loop. So the music was modified all the way up until through the dress rehearsal, because we didn't know until we got on stage how long all those lighting cues would take, and so the music was being tweaked all the way up until the premiere.
But what kind of room is there for nuance in the evening, or are there places in these dances for improvisation?
There's a lot of room for nuance, but there's really no room in these works that you saw tonight for improv. There's nothing, you can't stray at all from really the counts or the spacing or the articulation of the movement. Maybe in a solo, but not really. They don't even in their solos in these three works. I mean, and we typically don't have a lot of works that involve improv.
It sounds like it's more in the creative process that it becomes a tool for exploration, but then the choreography gets set out of that improvisation.
Yeah. And then it's Tom's role to maintain the integrity of each piece, the style of each piece. You will not believe it from the struggle that dance companies are going through these days, but dance is a big business in a way. Ballets, especially successful ones, are very expensive. They are licensed. Even though we commission all three pieces on this program tonight, we do not own the rights of any of those. We basically agree in a licensing agreement that varies between 3 or 5 years. The choreographer has the last word. If Mr. Cerrudo comes here tonight and announced, and there's some change made on stage or to his choreography, he could pull the ballet out of the repertoire. So it's very regulated.
How can you bring somebody new into a group if a dancer moves on?
There's really a culture within the group that the dancers have great ownership in the work. The work was created on them, so they feel it belongs to them. And when they pass it along to others, there's a great sense of responsibility and a great love for what they do. And they support each other.
But it's also part of your identity now those are the dancers who want to work with you, and those are the dancers you want to work with who want to be in that kind of atmosphere.
We also do not hire dancers. We hire people first. And that's really what we're looking in a dancer or an individual. It's a very, very long process for us. Sometimes it takes weeks. We usually bring the dancers to Aspen. They spend time with the company. We get to know them as people. If the dancing is not great, Tom will fix it over time. Other dancers, we influence them. But what we cannot change is the type of artists that they are and what they share and what they bring. The humility that they have. And so after 20 years, I think we became a little bit better, and we know what we're looking for.